Gen 3 competitive singles has a history stretching back 20 years, full of incredible stories, metagame developments, controversies, and lore. Gen 3 OU remains one of the most popular old generations of competitive Pokemon to this day, and we are still seeing frequent innovations in high-level tournament play. I put together this Gen 3 OU Iceberg with the help of the community. Let's explore the depths of one of Pokemon's most legendary formats together, from the common knowledge at the top to the obscurity down below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to prevent my arch nemesis Iron Mugulis from releasing his own video titled The Drinkware Iceberg Explained. If a mere cup outperforms me on YouTube, my sense of pride will take a significant hit. Thank you. First entry on the iceberg is Tar number 1. Tar is a shorthand for Tyranitar, who is largely considered to be the best Pokemon in Gen 3 OU. Tyranitar's defining trait is its ability Sandstream, which creates permanent sandstorm on the field as soon as Tyranitar switches in. This seems like it might be restrictive. Sandstorm chip damage means that leftovers healing is completely nullified on a vast majority of Pokemon in the format. With how easy it is to create sandstorm on the field and no other weather effects to really stop it, wouldn't this be a huge problem? Actually, the opposite is true. The biggest impact Sandstorm has on the metagame is that it punishes defensive gameplay. The Pokemon that suffer the most from having their leftovers healing slashed are stally Pokemon like Blissey, Suicune, Snorlax, Celebi, and Melodic. If not for Sandstream, these Pokemon would probably be at the absolute forefront of the metagame, and they're already very good. The metagame therefore skews to many defensive Pokemon that are immune to Sandstorm, and the majority of these Pokemon don't have access to powerful healing moves like Recover to stick around for massive amounts of time. Permanent Sandstorm defines the pace and identity of Gen 3 OU in a very positive way. But of course there's more to Tyranitar than just setting sand on the field. Tyranitar is a potent threat on its own merits. Tyranitar has an enormous 134 base attack, great defensive stats, access to Dragon Dance making it a formidable offensive sweeper, and a vast move pool with myriad physical, special attacking options, and even utility. Tyranitar is extremely versatile and malleable. It can change its role completely from team to team. There are standard sets that you see commonly like Dragon Dance Tyranitar, but even those sets have huge amounts of variation possible. Dragon Dance Tyranitar can run options like Counter to catch a Meteor Mash Metagross off guard, Focus Punch to chunk Rock Resist switch-ins, Ice Beam to punish Flygon, HP Grass to punish Swampert. I've even seen Hyper Beam on Dragon Dance Tyranitar. This is a Pokemon that is endlessly customizable. You can make up your own Tyranitar set, tweak the EVs however you want. Tyranitar is at its most versatile in Gen 3 than any other gen, and I can't think of a better number 1 Pokemon in any other format. Despite all of this Pokemon's amazing advantages, it is not overwhelming. It's very easy to manage Tyranitar. Tyranitar's ×4 weakness to fighting and extremely low speed tier as well make it very targetable. Tyranitar as the mascot of this format really encapsulates everything that I love about it. Up next is TSS, which is an acronym that stands for Toxic Spikes Sand. This is the name of a team archetype in Gen 3 OU that is quite self-explanatory. These teams center around creating spikes on the field to apply pressure to the enemy as they switch in, creating permanent sandstorm on the field to cut that important leftovers healing from targets like Blissey and Snorlax, and Toxic as well to punish many of the flying types and levitating Pokemon that aren't affected by spikes, and also just stack up that residual damage further on various targets. TSS teams can operate at many different paces. Some are more defensive, aiming to make the game go longer and stack up residual damage over a longer period of time, but some are more aggressive, and the way they take advantage of spikes is by forcing switches with offensive threats like Aerodactyl and Gengar. TSS is basically the central strategy of Gen 3 OU. A lot of teams try to counter it or tech against it in certain ways, but TSS teams have remained relevant and central from the early days up until now. The Big Five refers to a combination of 5 Pokemon that are commonly seen together and form a fantastic synergistic core. These 5 Pokemon are Tyranitar, Skarmory, Blissey, Swampert, and Gengar. Speaking of TSS, this is the most classic TSS gameplay there is. You have Toxic Spikes and Sand, and these 5 Pokemon provide you with pretty much everything you need. Skarm Bliss is a classic combo that you see in many generations, but in Gen 3 it's particularly effective. Skarmory's the physical wall, Blissey's the special wall. Swampert guards you against the common Dragon Dance Tyranitar, Dragon Dance Salamence, Metagross, Aerodactyl. Swampert covers so many different threats, and Gengar not only blocks the enemy from using Rapid Spin thanks to its ghost typing, helping you maintain your spikes on the field, it's also a form of offense. It's a special attacker that can force switches on its own, has so much possible utility, moveset variety, and the 6th Pokemon on this team can be a lot of different things depending on what you want. Aerodactyl is a great one. Aerodactyl and Tyranitar style work really well together offensively. You can go Zapdos, a fundamentally very solid Pokemon. Starmie's another common choice. Moltres. While it may seem like a very cookie-cutter strategy to use the big five, all 5 of these Pokemon have extremely malleable and versatile sets, Tyranitar and Gengar especially, but even something like Blissey that seems really one-dimensional, just a special ball, is actually a very versatile Pokemon. You can choose multiple different coverage options on Blissey, special attacking options to cover the metagame, different choices for status moves, different utility, something like Wish if you want to go in a more bulky direction, Calm Mind Blissey if you want to use it as a win condition. Swampert is really versatile too. You can run the standard set, which is Hydro Pump, Earthquake, Protect, Ice Beam. That covers a lot of bases, but you can go in a more defensive direction with Swampert, go Surf, Toxic, Refresh, making it really sturdy, investing way more in bulk. Go offensive Swampert with Focus Punch to punish Blissey and Snorlax and Pokemon like that. You can go Endeavor Swampert, which runs Slackberry and aims to trade down with the enemy as much as it can. This combo of 5 Pokemon can operate at many different paces, suit many different playstyles, and that's why I recommend big 5 teams for beginners, because you have the framework, you have the 5 Pokemon there, but you can tweak them however you want. And using big 5 teams is a great way to figure out what your own preferred playstyle is. It's also a common misconception that big 5 teams are easy to use, and if you use them, you'll get easy wins. It's not really true, because the big 5 are the most targeted Pokemon in the entire metagame. Entire strategies exist around specifically countering the big 5, so if anything, you have a huge target on your back, the enemy knows your exact game plan, they can probably piece together your entire team very quickly. But I think it's a good way to learn the game, to play with a team style that everyone knows what it does. You're not hiding any gimmicks or cheesing your way to victory. You're winning through fundamentals and good decision making. Up next is Spinblockers. Spinblockers are ghost types that aim to block the enemy from using rapid spin. The most commonly seen spin blocker in the game is Gengar. It's the best ghost type in Gen 3. It has fantastic stats and extremely versatile move pool and can be used in many different ways. But some alternative spin blockers you do see sometimes are Misdreavus, probably the second most popular, Dusclops, who is used on some stall teams, and there's also some fringe ones like Banette, my personal favorite, who is rare ghost type physical attacker, and Sableye has even been experimented with, which I discussed in a video. As of now, the concept of spin blocking is as simple as switching a ghost type in and blocking rapid spin, but as we get further down the iceberg, we'll discuss the concept of spin blocking in a more abstract sense, so stay tuned for that. Up next, no physical special split, and this is a Gen 3 mechanic that turns a lot of people away from the metagame. Prior to the Gen 4 games, a move being physical or special was determined purely by what type it was. Fire type attacks, for example, are always special attacks. Fighting type attacks are always physical attacks. Even Fire Punch is a special attack in Gen 3. This turns a lot of people away because it seems more restrictive. Something like Gengar can't use Shadow Ball for stab because Ghost is always a physical type. And the physical special split system from Gen 4 onwards is a lot more intuitive and easy to understand. Of course, Ice Punch should be a physical attack, that makes sense. But I think that the lack of physical special split in Gen 3 makes it stand out mechanically, and there are a lot of options that exist in Gen 3 that don't in later games. Pokemon like Alakazam and Gengar have Ice Punch and Fire Punch for coverage, special coverage. Hidden Power can be physical, meaning something like Salamence can use Hidden Power Flying as a stab option. It doesn't have a good flying stab option other than that, besides Aerial Ace, very bad move. Hidden Power Bug is a common coverage option you see very frequently. A lot of Pokemon in Gen 3 don't even use stab moves at all, and there's some of the best Pokemon in the metagame, like Gengar. Doesn't need stab at all to be a potent special threat. There are plenty of metagames where the physical special split does exist, and it has its own benefits, but it has its drawbacks too. It's a different mechanical system, and I think it's a bit short-sighted to judge Gen 3 so strongly for not having it, when in fact it introduces a lot of new options, it allows people to be creative in unique ways, and it allows sets to exist that wouldn't exist in any other metagame. I also think the physical special split had its downsides in terms of leaning Pokemon sets more towards their stab options and perfect coverage, because there were more coverage options that suited the Pokemon's primary offensive attacking type, and sometimes that can lead to less moveset creativity and diversity. Up next are Rock Resists. Rock Resists are very important in Gen 3 OU and considered mandatory on most teams because of the presence of Pokemon like Tyranitar and Aerodactyl, who can be very overpowering with Stab Rock Slide. And when people say Rock Resist, they usually don't mean something like Metacham or Magneton that technically resists rock but can't quite check Tyranitar and Aerodactyl. They're referring to solid rock resists that give you a great defensive backbone like Swampert, Metagross, or Flygon. The majority of competitive teams will have some sort of rock resist on them. There are some rare teams that don't need solid rock resists, usually very aggressive teams that control the pace of the game so much that Pokemon like Tyranitar and Aerodactyl barely even get a chance to enter the field. Or you have some way to bait them or some other creative way to eliminate them. That's advanced level stuff, but you do see it. One example would be HP Fighting Aerodactyl. Hidden Power Fighting allows you to one-hit Tyranitar and outspeed them after they Dragon Dance, so that can be your answer to Dragon Dance Tyranitar instead of something like Swamp on a more aggressive team. But for the most part, you want some sort of solid rock resist on your team to handle not only the rock types, but various common threats. The final entry on the top level of the iceberg is Magnet Mag. Magneton is a staple of Gen 3 for its ability to trap and eliminate Skarmory, and to do so it needs to hold the item Magnet, which boosts your electric type damage by 10%. Skarmory usually runs special defense EVs in Gen 3, and with Magnet you maximize your chances to KO it. Eliminating Skarmory is a cornerstone of many common archetypes in Gen 3. Skarmory is a Pokemon that can handle a bunch of different threats at once, so the ability to trap and eliminate it enables all of those threats. Magneton is the central Pokemon behind the physical offense archetype, which has the simple game plan of eliminating Skarmory, who is their primary physical wall, and then overwhelming the enemy with multiple physical threats like Salamence, Metagross, Tyranitar, etc. Magneton can also enable more defensive strategies. By eliminating their means of creating spikes, you have a massive advantage in the Hazard War. Some teams go more defensive with Claydol as a teammate to rapid spin after eliminating Skarmory, permanently removing their spike. Magneton has a bit more utility beyond that. You can punish enemies like Choice Band Metagross. If they lock into Meteor Mash, they can't click anything else and they're completely trapped, so you can quickly two-hit them with Thunderbolt. That could be very useful. Magneton can also eliminate Forretress, who kind of has a similar role to Skarmory on some alternative spikes teams. Sometimes you can eliminate Jirachi too. If you have the support of Leech Seed Celebi, you can go Magneton and run Substitute on the Magneton to do that classic sub-seed strategy. Defensive Jirachi sets with Toxic and Fire Punch can sometimes be 1v1 by Magneton too. Overall, Magneton is a staple of the metagame and one of the best anti-meta strategies. We've reached level 2 of the iceberg, folks, and the first entry is ZapDug, another fairly self-explanatory one. This is the combination of the Pokemon Zapdos and Dug trio, but why are they used together? Because they have a very good offensive synergy. And this combo is the cornerstone of an archetype called Special Offense. Similar to physical offense, the primary goal of this team style is to eliminate Blissey, the most common special wall in the game, and then overwhelm the enemy with multiple special threats. The most reliable way to eliminate Blissey is with a bulky Dugtrio set, running special defense EV so that it can live a modest Blissey Ice Beam and two-hit KO it with either Beat Up or Earthquake. Zapdos benefits greatly from eliminating Blissey for obvious reasons. It's probably the best special attacker in the entire format, and with its greatest counter eliminated completely, it can run rampant. But another reason that Zapdos and Dugtrio synergize so well on these special offense teams is because of Zapdos having access to Baton Pass. Baton Pass is used simply to pivot. U-turn didn't exist yet, Volt Switch didn't exist yet, so a simple Baton Pass was the best way to pivot. Pivoting with Baton Pass is different to simply switching directly because you can see whether the enemy switched or not first and react accordingly. Switches are the first thing to happen in a turn and moves happen next, so with the informational advantage you have, you can respond perfectly. And a great interaction that commonly happens is that Blissey switches in against Zapdos and you Baton Pass cleanly to Dugtrio, eliminating Blissey reliably. Zapdos very commonly invites in Blissey because it's a special wall, so this combo is pretty much an archetype defining idea. Special offense is one of the most primary archetypes you see, and you probably noticed at this point that if a Gen 3 team is not using spikes as its main form of offensive pressure, it's probably using some sort of trapper like Magneton or Dugtrio to enable a different kind of game plan. Up next, Sleep Talk Reset. This is a mechanical quirk in Gen 3 that a lot of people aren't aware of. I'm sure many of you know that when you use the move Rest, you fully heal yourself, but you inflict sleep upon yourself. But that sleep only lasts for 2 turns, unlike directly inflicted sleep. So you're probably aware of how Sleep Talk works, because it randomly selects a move you have to use while you're sleeping. However, in Gen 3, when you use Sleep Talk and then you switch out of your sleeping Pokemon and back in, it resets the sleep counter back to 0. Unlike in later gens, where if you Sleep Talk, switch out back in, your sleep counter ticked down by 1, so you have 1 more sleep turn remaining. This is a mechanic that comes up quite a lot, and it's kind of a way to punish Sleep Talk users, I suppose. The mechanic was probably not intentional, it's some sort of glitch, but I kind of like it. It prevents Sleep Talk spam from being too powerful. And sometimes a Sleep Talk Pokemon like Zapdos or Suicune might rather not click Sleep Talk so that they can switch out and have their sleep counter tick down. It adds more layers of decision making. Sometimes you want to just burn a sleep turn instead of clicking Sleep Talk. Speaking of Sleep Talk, the next entry on the iceberg is CroCune. This set is named after the player Cromat, who invented the set and was a player back in the net battle days. It's a very simple set. It's a Suicune set that uses Calm Mind, Rest, Sleep Talk, and Surf. This set is very powerful in Gen 3 because CroCune is a water type, and water types are only weak to electric and grass, both of which are special attacking types. So if you Calm Mind up to a certain point, your CroCune is basically not scared of anything, and it can snowball out of control and start, well, sweeping everything, even surfing while it's sleeping thanks to Sleep Talk, boosting itself up further. This is a classic noob killer set, I like to call it, because if you let this thing get multiple free turns and you're not prepared for it, you allow it to snowball, you're going to lose very quickly. As I said, you have to be aware of, you have to respond to it quickly and not let it get out of hand. And some things just never age, folks. This set was a monster back in the early 2000s metagame, and to this day, it is a staple. You see this set all the time. It's great on Magneton teams, actually, because Skarmory's Roar is no longer a concern for CroCune after Skarmory's eliminated. This is one of the rare special attackers that can 1v1 Blissey because it just boosts up to the point where Blissey can't handle it anymore, and it's immune to status because of rest. There are ways to manage this set though. It's pretty one-dimensional. Its only attacking type is water, so if you want to hard counter this, you can run a water absorb Pokemon. Bulky Zapdos sets with Roar are very good against it, as well as miscellaneous Pokemon with Roar, and Celebi with Leech Seed or Perish Song also shuts it down and prevents it from sweeping. Pokemon like Zapdos, Gengar, and Starmie can also directly offensively threaten CroCune. Up next we have Superman, which is a bit of a funny name for a Pokemon archetype in Gen 3 with a simple game plan as well. Much like Superman, your goal is to take to the skies and fly above the spikes. Flying types and Pokemon with Levitate are completely immune to Spike's chip damage, and what better way to punish Spikes than just to run a bunch of Pokemon immune to them? Superman exists as a response to the central concept of Spike stacking. Commonly seen Pokemon on these teams are Skarmory, Flygon as a rock resist with Levitate, immune to Spikes. Zapdos is also a staple. You commonly see Moltres. There are many different ways to go with the Superman team. You can go aggressive and run something like Aerodactyl and Gengar, try to spin block the enemy, act as a TSS team yourself, but one that isn't worried about enemy spikes. Or you can go in a Stoli direction. Going completely all in on spike immune Pokemon can leave you very vulnerable. It's not common that all 6 Pokemon are immune to spikes, but rather just about 4 or 5. Often the one exception will be some sort of defensive Pokemon that helps you in bad matchups. When you're running a core of Skarmory, Flygon, Zapdos, you can get very destroyed by offensive water types like offensively oriented CroCune sets or Starmie or offensive Swampert sets. Blissey helps you out a lot in those matchups and generally is very useful as a special wall and can provide utility like aromatherapy. Wish. I quite like Articuno Superman teams actually. It's more of a fringe option, but it helps out enormously against offensive water types, especially because it's neutral to ice, which is common coverage, and its spike immune itself has access to Heal Bell. Misdreavus has been a popular recent example as a spin blocker. Weezing is a good one. Mantine you sometimes see. That's quite rare, but I've seen it before. I would say Superman teams are a bit inconsistent, at least in my opinion, and a bit hard to use because of their inherent defensive flaws and exploitable weaknesses. But in the right matchup, they can really punish common spikes teams. They're a staple in tournament play, used to punish people that rely too heavily on the standard Skarmory Blissey game plans. And I'm sure this is another archetype that'll probably exist forever in Gen 3 in some form. And there's a lot more to be done in Superman teams. There's a lot more optimization to be had, different Pokemon to experiment with. Up next, Turn Taunt. Taunt is a move introduced in Gen 3 that prevents the enemy from using any non-attacking moves, and this will become a staple utility move from then on. But in Gen 3, Taunt only lasts for 2 turns, including the turn you use it. Taunt Pokemon in Gen 3 often have to keep using the move repeatedly, and because of that, there's mind games that arise. Common Taunt target like Blissey can simply attack instead against an enemy like Gengar and win the 1v1 as a result. The fact that Taunt has to keep being reapplied actually introduces this element of counterplay to it that is kind of interesting and unique to Gen 3. That extra turn of being taunted in later gens is very significant. Yet another minor mechanical difference that sets Gen 3 apart a little bit. Final entry of level 2 is another unique Gen 3 mechanic, KO end turn. In Gen 3, if your Pokemon faints, the enemy is actually unable to act at all. This is a very significant mechanic and a way to disrupt the enemy and deny them free turns to boost up or heal, and it comes up very often. Explosion is a staple of Gen 3 not only because of its enormous power, effectively reaching 500 when you factor in the defense drop, but the fact that it completely denies the enemy from taking their turn is also enormous. This is the most common way this mechanic comes up. You will see Gengar explode against Blissey, for example, pivot into Dugtrio for a trap since Blissey is unable to take a turn, they're unable to heal back up. Even something like Smeargle with a very weak explosion will still explode against a Tyranitar sometimes just to prevent them from using Dragon Dance. Gengar can do the same against Tyranitar, so can Cloyster. Another way to deny the enemy's turn is by sacking your Pokemon to Spike. Sometimes it can be advantageous to keep a Pokemon within range of fainting to Spikes purely to disrupt the enemy on one turn and enable some sort of chain reaction to win the game. Because when you sacrifice your Pokemon to Spikes, you switch out, which is the first action that happens in a turn, and then they can't act at all because your Pokemon fainted. That is the most reliable way sometimes to disrupt the enemy. Some other ways to activate this mechanic are with Double Edge, which can recoil yourself and deny the enemy from taking a turn. Memento, which is a pretty rarely seen move, but it does come up sometimes. I personally really love this mechanic. I think it enhances the format greatly. It creates these really cool interactions, exciting ways to enable your offensive plan and keep up momentum. And it enhances decision making. You can bring guys into low range purely to sacrifice them and enable this mechanic. Sometimes a weak explosion with Gengar, sacrificing your entire Gengar is worth it just for the momentum of denying their turn and getting a pivot in. Like, that's a really awesome decision to make. Do I sacrifice my entire Gengar for some tempo? The way they reworked this mechanic in later gens where you can act if the enemy gets fainted isn't bad necessarily, but I do like this unique mechanic in Gen 3. I think it adds to the format. We are now on level 3, and the first entry is JaskWak. This is a dreaded combo of two Pokemon, Ninjask and Marowak. Marowak is kind of an interesting Pokemon in Gen 3. It's extremely slow, but it has the exclusive item Thick Club. This is an amazing item that doubles Marowak's attack stat. So Marowak is one of the strongest attackers in all of Gen 3, but it has the issue of being a bit too slow to pose much of a threat. But that's when Ninjask comes in. Ninjask is a absolute pest, with access to the ability Speed Boost, which raises its speed stat by 1 every turn. Ninjask can use Baton Pass to pass on these speed boosts to a teammate, and one of the best recipients for speed boosts in the game is Marowak. Sometimes simply passing 2 speed boosts to Marowak and then clicking Swords Dance ends the game on the spot. Marowak is an extremely powerful attacker, and when it's able to outrun everything, and it's boosted up on top of its amazing coverage options. It has Stab Earthquake, Bone Meringue, which you can use to break substitutes, Rock Slide or Hidden Power Rock if you prefer to be more accurate, and even Double Edge alongside Rock Head to be completely immune to that recoil damage, having a strong neutral hit. This strategy is the cornerstone of many speed pass game plans, and it's a bit cheesy as well. Unprepared teams will lose almost immediately to this. The JaskWak team style is what I would describe as a matchup fish. In some matchups, this will just win on the spot, and in others, it will completely flounder and fail to get off the ground and do much of anything. Ninjask is an extremely one-dimensional Pokemon. You know what it's going to do as soon as you see it, and if you're aware of that, it's very easy to stop. A simple roar will completely ruin this game plan most of the time, or just attacking Ninjask repeatedly, denying it from getting a substitute up, and then responding to the Marowak once it comes in. Marowak usually can't one-hit KO common Pokemon. It needs the Swords Dance or Belly Drum boost, so you can respond to it most of the time if you react quickly. Up next, Yolo Skarm. This is a gimmicky Skarmory set that you've probably heard of. Freezeye made a video about this one. As we established earlier, Magneton is Skarmory's greatest rival. It can trap Skarmory, preventing it from switching, and eliminate it with a super effective magnet-boosted Thunderbolt. But what if Skarmory said YOLO and used Hidden Power Ground and Speed Investment to outrun Magneton and KO it with super effective ground damage? That's what Yolo Skarm is. With full attack and full speed investment, Skarmory can outrun and KO Magneton outright. Funnily enough, Magneton and Skarmory have the exact same speed stat, but because Magneton commonly runs Hidden Power Fire to trap Forretress and eliminate it, that requires -1 speed IV, so Magneton, with its most standard sets, will be 1 speed slower than a max speed Skarmory. While this set sounds alluring and it sounds like a really cool way to get the jump on Magneton, it's actually quite bad in my opinion. Even though you can eliminate Magneton and catch it by surprise with this, you have to invest fully in attack and speed to do so, and that means you can't invest in HP and special defense, which are extremely important. Yolo Skarm will faint extremely quickly to a lot of things that it could completely withstand with its more standard set. Hidden Power Ground is also a total waste of a move slot that you could use on something more important like Protect or Drill Peck or Taunt. And if you don't face a Magneton, you're just an incredibly useless Skarmory, so in that way, it's a matchup fish. It's generally considered more optimal by top players to just accept Magneton traps when they happen. Skarmory will usually make one layer of spikes as Magneton enters, feint, and then bring something in which can recover momentum a little bit. This is a fairly neutral position to be in. You did lose your Skarmory, but now you have your offensive threat in, you're applying pressure, and you have one spike on the field. You're not in a terrible spot at all. It's pretty neutral, in fact. There are some situations where Yolo Skarm can be good, but most of the time it's a gimmick. A pretty hilarious development, and whoever came up with the initial idea is kind of a madman. Congratulations. But not the most consistent strategy in the world. The next entry in level 3 is 3 numbers: 12.5, 16.67, 25. And these 3 numbers are the amount of damage that each subsequent layer of spikes will deal. 1 layer of spikes deals 12.5%, 2 layers deals 16.67, 3 layers deals 25. What's so significant about this? Well, you'll notice that the difference between 0 and 1 layer of spikes is 12.5, which is the most significant jump in damage, but the difference between 1 layer of spikes and 2 layer of spikes is only 4.17% damage. So basically the second layer of spikes is not as worth making as the first layer. The third layer is a bit more worth it, providing you with 8.33% extra damage, but the second layer provides the least amount of extra damage. It's very important to know these numbers and understand them because it changes how you will play with spikes. Committing to multiple spikes not only has diminishing returns, but it can be punished by 1 rapid spin. If you spend 3 turns making spikes and the enemy spends 1 turn rapid spinning them away, they're getting way more tempo. They erased your 3 turns of work in 1 turn. If you only established 1 spike and they rapid spin away that spike, the amount of tempo is neutral. That's why it's often a common practice to just throw out 1 layer of spikes in the other game, because that's a significant increase in pressure, but it can't be punished as much by overcommitment. Some teams can afford to spam the 3 layer of spikes and lose their Pokemon in the process because they are more all in on the game plan of spin block. Often Smeargle or Cloyster Spikes teams are very aggressive. They aim to just spam spikes and go all in with their threats and win quickly. These are hyper offense spikes team. But the more standard TSS teams should probably just throw out 1 spike at a time. Yes, you can spin block with Gengar on those teams too, but that can open up risks. Claydol and Starmie are both able to chip down and eliminate Gengar, luring it in. The more spikes you commit to, the more all-in you are on spin blocking, which can be flimsy. But if the enemy rapid spins away your single spike, it's not a huge loss, is it? And you can always come back in and make 1 more. If you're going to take Gen 3 seriously, remember these spike damage numbers. They're very important. Up next is Sandstorm Order. This is another important mechanic in Gen 3. This is actually an example where the Gen 3 OU played on Pokemon Showdown is slightly modified from the cartridge. On the cartridge, there is actually a coin flip at the start of the game to determine who gets hit by Sandstorm chip damage and other effects first. So that is determined by a complete 50-50. Most players really disliked this mechanic, and so it was altered. Modifying the cartridge is something that rarely happens. It's usually reserved for emergency situations, and most players pushed for this. They wanted it to happen to improve the experience of the format. So Gen 3 OU was altered, and now Sandstorm is determined by the speed stat. Whichever Pokemon has a higher speed stat will be hit by the Sandstorm first, which is in line with how it works in later games in the series. You can use this mechanic to determine whether you are faster than an enemy Pokemon or not, which can help influence your decision making if you know you're faster or slower, and it helps you deduce what set they might be based on certain amounts of speed investment they have. Another quirk of Sandstorm Order in Gen 3 is that Sandstorm chip damage happens before leftovers healing. This means that if a Pokemon is left at 6.25% or lower while Sandstorm is active, they will faint because Sandstorm chip damage will happen before their leftovers healing does. It's very important to be aware of this so that you can determine whether your Pokemon will live a certain hit or whether you can KO certain enemy Pokemon. Up next we have Beat Up, which is a move in Gen 3 OU, and you might be wondering why a simple Dark type attack is on an Iceberg. What's so special about Beat Up? Well, in Gen 3, Beat Up is a bizarre move with many different inner workings. Even though this move is listed as a Dark type attack, which would imply that it is a special attack, because all Dark type attacks in Gen 3 are special, Beat Up kind of defies that. It is not a Dark type attack, it is in fact a typeless attack. It is a typeless physical attack that defies the normal rules of damage calculation. Most damaging moves will take into account all of your own stats, including EVs, natures that apply extra stats, and so will the enemies. But Beat Up is different. Rather than just your own Pokemon attacking, your entire team will attack the enemy with one small typeless physical hit. The only stats used in the calculation for these physical hits are base stats. Extra stats applied through EVs, IVs, and natures are not taken into account at all. And if one of your allies is status inflicted or fainted, they will not take part in the Beat Up attack. Beat Up in Gen 3 is basically used as a way to hit Blissey really hard. Blissey has an extremely bad defense stat and will usually invest all of its bonus stats in defense to make up for that as much as it can. But Beat Up ignores all of those extra stats. It completely ignores EVs, natures, and IVs. It will attack Blissey based purely on its defense stat, so it will do enormous damage. Even if the Pokemon using it doesn't have any attack investment, it can still 2-hit KO a Blissey. Beat Up is most commonly used on Dugtrio to eliminate Blissey, because it requires no offensive stats or investment from Dugtrio to be able to 2-hit KO. Some other common Pokemon that use Beat Up to pressure Blissey include Charizard and Houndoom. Charizard can lure in Blissey thanks to its special attacks and then hit it with a surprise Beat Up for enormous, unexpected damage. And Houndoom can do the very same. While this move is bizarre and hard to understand, you can't even properly calculate this on the Pokemon Showdown calculator because it's too complex to implement. There is a custom Beat Up calculator, but I don't really bother using that ever. Basically, if you have a healthy team, Beat Up will 2-hit Blissey. That's kind of all you need to know, and despite all this complexity, it's a good thing to have in the metagame. Blissey is central, it's everywhere, and it's nice to have a way to directly punish Blissey. The final entry on layer 3 of the Iceberg is Silent Quick Claw. Quick Claw is an item you're probably familiar with. It has a 20% chance to cause the Pokemon to move first in their priority bracket. This is a Pokemon commonly used by cheesers to get that lucky proc and move first and get a surprise KO on something. In later generations, when Quick Claw activates, it broadcasts it to the enemy. This reveals to you that the reason they moved first is because of Quick Claw and reveals that their item is Quick Claw. In Gen 3, however, Quick Claw does not have that activation message. Your Pokemon will just move first without any explanation. And this is kind of insane. This can cause a lot of confusion. A lot of people are not aware of this, and when a Camerupt randomly goes first and KOs their Jolteon, they will question reality and think that the enemy is cheating. They will think that something has gone terribly wrong. Even me, when Quick Claw activates, it takes me a second to realize that it did. Quick Claw, right. In some situations, this can also bluff speed investment. Maybe you're slower than the enemy, but they don't know that. You move first thanks to Quick Claw, and they think you're faster. That influences their decision making, and actually the entire time you were just a lucker who got a Quick Claw proc at the perfect moment. I consider this to be one of the negatives of Gen 3. I think announcing that you have a Quick Claw was a positive change. This just serves to cause confusion, and in general I don't really like the Quick Claw item. I don't think it adds much value to the metagame. It's purely RNG fishing, but that's only my opinion. We have reached level 4 of the Iceberg, and the first entry is Houdini. What is Houdini? This is a nickname for Choice Band Metagross lead, specifically when they click Explosion turn 1, aiming to eliminate an incoming Skarmory, because a Choice Band Metagross Explosion actually one-hit KOs the standard Skarmory set. It can also take out important switch-ins like Swampert, Melodic, or Suicune, which can enable your teammates. This set is one of the most common lures in all of Gen 3 OU. It is a nice way to just get rid of Skarmory immediately. It can be an alternative plan to Magneton teams. Instead of Magneton, you run this, or maybe you run both. It's excellent on spikeless offense teams, which you see occasionally, for its ability to lure in important walls and eliminate them. But why is it called Houdini? Where did the nickname come from? There used to be a player on the ladder, I'm not sure who it was, but they would always lead with a Metagross nicknamed Houdini, and they would always explode, every time without fail. And it worked out pretty well. They got pretty high ranks with this simple strategy. I'm not sure who this person was. It might be someone who's still around. I don't know, but Houdini was plaguing the ladder for a time, and people matched against this fella so often that the nickname for Choice Band Metagross lead aiming to explode on turn 1 became Houdini in honor of this gamer. I think it was nicknamed Houdini because it makes the Skarmory disappear. Very apt nickname. Up next, ZardLoom. This is a combination of Charizard and Breloom and is a fantastic offensive core on spikeless offense teams. Not only is this a commonly seen core on that team style, it is also a reference to a specific team that used these two Pokemon that was a landmark in recent team building. Before this team came along, both Charizard and ZardLoom were considered UUBL ranked. They were not in OU, but this team proved how good they were and caused them to eventually be re-evaluated and become OU ranked. This was a team built by the player Undisputed, and BKC has a great video outlining the advantages of the team and why it was such a paradigm shift. ZardLoom works well on spikeless offense teams because of Spore, by incapacitating an enemy and basically soft KOing it, and then following that up with a powerful focus punch. You are starting the game off with a huge amount of early momentum. This is a great way to make progress on a team without the typical standard progress making tools of spikes or trappers. Charizard is a Pokemon that can take advantage of the free turns enabled by Sleep very effectively. With a free entry point, Charizard can begin posing a threat and tearing through the enemy's defensive core. Charizard is one of the most self-sufficient offensive threats in Gen 3 OU because of its Fire Grass coverage and access to both Beat Up and Focus Punch as mixed attacking options. Substitute Focus Punch Charizard is a common choice, and that can significantly punish Blissey and Tyranitar. Beat Up is preferred on teams that want to directly threaten Blissey without needing to substitute. The next entry is yet another series of 3 numbers: 168, 164, 176. What could this mean? This refers to a popular Gengar EV spread. This is an insane looking EV spread with 168 health, 164 special defense, 176 in speed, and a hasty nature. This set has a lot of specific interactions it enables. With a hasty nature, you are able to put Bold Blissey into range of Dugtrio's Earthquake using Explosion. The HP and special defense allow you to survive Tyranitar's pursuit, including Sandstorm damage. It allows you to outspeed base 100 timid Pokemon like Zapdos and Salamence thanks to the speed investment. It also allows you to just survive a Starmie Psychic from full. Starmie Psychic will deal a maximum of 99.6%. You live on 1 and you can explode to trade with Starmie, maintaining your spikes permanently. I think this EV spread is an example of how optimized Gen 3 can be. In this lower power level world, intricate EV spreads like this that can enable specific interactions feel so much more impactful and important. Arriving at this particular EV spread took years of metagame development. And this EV spread is kind of famous on Smogon for having an absurd amount of variable options. You usually go to Smogon for standard sets that have 1 or 2 interchangeable options, but look at this. The amount of options on this set is unbelievable, and the set description is an essay. Look at this. Gengar is, in my opinion, the most complex Pokemon in Gen 3 OU. The amount of different options it has, the ways you can EV it depending on the team, are infinite. Even these standard tried and true EV spreads that took years to arrive at but are commonly used have insane amounts of moveset variety, but you can also tweak the EVs by yourself depending on the team, depending on the speed benchmark you need to hit, and bulk benchmarks, which there are many of to consider. This EV spread is just a perfect example of how intricate this stuff can get in Gen 3. Up next, Mr. Mime Ban. Believe it or not, Mr. Mime is actually banned from competitive play in Gen 3 OU. Thanks to its ability Soundproof, which makes it immune to Roar, the primary source of phasing and anti-boost sweepers in Gen 3 OU, Mr. Mime was the cornerstone of a strategy where you could create infinite baton pass chains that could not really be interacted with or countered. These teams got so optimized that they were topping ladder consistently and running rampant in tournaments, and the counterplay to them was limited. Whirlwind could be used to phase out Mr. Mime, but the amount of Pokemon with Whirlwind is insanely limited. Skarmory is the most common one, and then there's Hariyama. That's about it. These teams would often play around this by using Magneton to eliminate Skarmory, eliminating the main Whirlwind user of the format. So the ability Soundproof was banned from competitive play in Gen 3 OU. Phasing is kind of a fundamental mechanic that we need to prevent these boost sweeping strategies from getting out of control, and Soundproof had this game-breaking potential to completely stop that. And since Soundproof is Mr. Mime's only ability option, Mr. Mime is therefore banned. And no, they are not going to mod the game so that Mr. Mime can run no ability, because that's a massive can of worms, an unprecedented action that's never been done before just to enable a largely irrelevant Pokemon. Very much not worth doing. Up next, Counter Glitch. This is a cool one. Counter is a move with negative priority, meaning it will almost always move last. After taking physical damage, counter will deal the exact amount that you took times 2 to the enemy. This is one of my favorite Pokemon moves. I love it. I think it's a great way to punish certain interactions. You can get really clutch moments with counter. Whenever this happens in a tournament, it's really awesome. But something people don't know is that you can actually counter Hidden Power in Gen 3, even though it's a special attack. This is because of a weird quirk in the programming. Hidden Power starts out as a normal type move and then changes based on your Pokemon's IVs into different types. But because in its base state it's a normal type move, counter considers it to be a physical attack even if it's a special attack. It's a glitch. So because of that, you can actually use counter against Hidden Power Grass or Hidden Power Fire and it'll work, even though you're using it against a special attack. One cool application of this is with Swampert. You can run a specially defensive Swampert with counter, bait an enemy's Zapdos or Salamence to use HP Grass and get a surprise KO. Another one of my favorite applications of this is with Skarmory. You can run counter Skarmory, and when Celebi uses Hidden Power Fire against you, you hit them with a surprise counter and ruin their life. I know it's a glitch, I know it's a bit unintuitive, it doesn't really make much sense, but I still like this. I like the interactions it can create. And it's a cool team building option, something you can pull out of the back pocket and catch someone off guard with. I always love stuff like that. Another little unique quirk that sets Gen 3 apart. Up next, Lax Slander. What does this mean? Lax is a shorthand for Snorlax, and some people make some slanderous claims about Snorlax. It's that simple. A lot of the Snorlax slander is spearheaded by the player BKC, who has made a couple videos insisting that Gen 3 Snorlax is no good. It is a bad and overrated Pokemon. I think in the old metagames, Snorlax was much more prevalent and considered top tier. As the metagame has gone on, as things have gotten more optimized, Snorlax, people realized it requires a lot of support to make it work, and maybe it's not quite the metagame staple that we once thought it was, but personally, I think that the Snorlax slander is quite overblown. The reason for Snorlax's shortcomings are simply that it has a bad matchup against a lot of the most common Pokemon in the game. Snorlax is horrendous against Skarmory, Metagross, Gengar punishes Snorlax, and most significantly of all, Snorlax is naturally very bad against the most common strategy, TSS. Sandstorm cuts Snorlax's leftovers healing, significantly reducing its longevity, and Spikes also punish Snorlax massively. Snorlax is incredibly limited in its healing. Its only option for a healing move is Rest, which compared to Blissey, who has Soft Boiled and Natural Cure to heal status, is much less self-sufficient and more exploitable. Snorlax being naturally weak to some of the most central ideas in the metagame makes it suffer significantly. But the thing about Snorlax is that in a vacuum, Snorlax might be the best Pokemon in the game. It's just all these outside factors keeping it down. But if you build around Snorlax, if you have Magneton to eliminate Skarmory, some sort of Weather Clear somewhere to eliminate Sand, Rapid Spin to get rid of those pesky Spikes, there is no Pokemon more worth building around than Snorlax, because when Snorlax is in its prime environment and it gets to curse up and rest up and become invincible, it's one of the best win conditions in the game. Despite all of these supposed shortcomings of Snorlax, you see Snorlax in pretty much every big tournament. I'm sure every high-level player has some kind of Snorlax team in the back pocket, and Snorlax also significantly punishes strategies that don't use those central ideas of Spikes and Sand. Snorlax has a fantastic matchup against special offense because Snorlax is not scared of Dugtrio. It's a special wall that can one-hit Dugtrio and shrug off those Earthquakes or beat up easily. Snorlax is excellent against spikeless offense strategies. It's great against miscellaneous random stuff that is non-standard. Despite all the slander that Snorlax receives, this is a Pokemon that you have to respect and have some sort of plan against, or it will destroy you. I think that Pokemon can be good in different ways. Something like Blissey is a great Pokemon because it is self-sufficient and it improves your matchups widely on its own. Snorlax can't quite do that, but Snorlax is a Pokemon that benefits way more than basically anything else in the entire format from the appropriate support. Even BKC himself used Snorlax against me despite his slanderous words, and he won with it. He destroyed me with it. Even if Snorlax's place in the metagame is less prestigious than it once was, this is going to be a staple win condition of Gen 3 OU forever, in my opinion. So leave Snorlax alone, have some respect. And for the final entry of Tier tier 4 of the iceberg, we have Yama OU. Yama is a shorthand for Hariyama, a Pokemon that is currently ranked in UUBL that many players believe should rise up to OU. Gen 3 comes from a time where usage-based tiering never existed, so the tiering in Gen 3 OU is based on perceived power level from the community. So unlike other old gens, you do occasionally see Pokemon rise up to OU based on their prevalence and success, something like Charizard, Moltres, Breloom, former UUBL Pokemon that rose up. Some have also dropped. Regice dropped from OU to UUBL, so did Raikou and Porygon 2, former popular staples that, as time went on, became less prevalent. Many players believe that Hariyama is the next one that deserves that coveted OU title. Hariyama is one of the best and most consistent fighting types in the format. It has so many advantages. It is one of the most solid Tyranitar answers in the game. It is extremely bulky with an enormous HP stat. It is one of the few Pokemon in Gen 3 with access to knockoff, which is very significant. This is a very scarce option in Gen 3, and Hariyama can use it very effectively to punish Skarmory, denying chip healing on it, targets like Claydol, important enemies that rely on leftovers. And on top of this defensive merit, it also has a huge amount of offensive firepower. Its attack is very impressive. It has the ability Guts, meaning it not only gets powered up when it's statused, it also is not afraid of burn, unlike most other physical attackers, which really helps out against Gengar, who often relies on Will-O-Wisp to subdue physical attackers. Hariyama has excellent breaking power with Stab Focus Punch. It can punish switch-ins in a way that no other fighting type can, thanks to knockoff. Salamence can come in and check the fighting type attacks, but it will be at the cost of losing its leftovers for the entirety of the game, meaning it's now vulnerable to Sandstorm Chip. Hariyama has been rising in popularity more and more over the years. It is seen very commonly in tournaments, and I agree with the sentiment that it deserves that OU spot at this point. It has proven to be a consistent presence in high-level play for quite a while now. And that does it for the first 4 layers of the Gen 3 OU iceberg. I'm going to split this up into 2 parts because this video is already getting quite lengthy and we're only halfway through. What do you think of the iceberg so far? This is my first time making something like this, so if you have any critiques, let me know. My main goal with this is just to inform you about some quirks about Gen 3 metagame developments and fun stories. So I hope I've achieved that so far, and stay tuned for part 2, everybody. Thank you.